So art has an extraordinary role to play in social justice, as we've seen in some of the papers today, in social justice activism, reconciliation following conflict, and peace building. I'm particularly interested in the supranational textile art movement that is demonstrating on multiple levels, the multiple levels on which art can have agency in social justice processes. In the 1980s, the Chilean feminist Julieta Kirkwood used the analogy of a web of knots to form the feminist movement in Latin America. And likewise, in 2020, Veronica Gago and Marta Malo spoke of the transversality of feminism, with different groups intersecting and connecting, forming a web or a woven fabric of feminism. So I like to think of the Latin American textile art movement in this way, as part of the grammar of the supranational feminist movement, with each textile art group being like a knot in the fabric of feminism that Kirkwood mentioned. Needlework groups connect with each other across national borders, communicating via social media and things like WhatsApp and email, and posting artworks to each other to be included in displays. On this slide, you see to the left, embroideries by one of the Mexican groups, Bordando por la Paz, embroidering for peace. And there are lots of embroidering for peace groups throughout Mexico, and indeed outside the Mexican borders, embroidering for Mexican victims of the Mexican war on drugs. So on these handkerchiefs are the names of the victims of the Mexican war on drugs, victims of femicide, victims of disappearance, and other people who've been killed and often get subsumed in the vast statistics of the atrocities in Mexico. So some people stitch these in outdoor collaborative participatory needlework sessions, and other people stitch them at home and post them to the organizers. Some of the groups are set up by the families of the disappeared, and some of them are ordinary people in solidarity making these embroideries and sending them to create a material marker of people who can often be swamped in the mass media representations of the Mexican war on drugs and its victims. So these handkerchiefs seek to represent humanity. The slowness of stitching seems to represent the humanity of the people. And it also counters a politics of time in which official histories produced by politicians and the mass media often present things in the past in order to depoliticize them. And here we see the Madres de la Plaza de Mayo, which is an Argentine group who in the 20th century created, they went to the plaza with headscarves on in memory of their children who had been disappeared during the Argentine Dirty War. And they also were perhaps the first group to really start working against this politics of time. They didn't want their children to be presented as dead because they didn't know where they were missing. So that's the top slide. And then you see in the bottom here, one of the Mexican handkerchiefs from Maricela Escobedo, whose daughter was one of the victims, and then who became a victim herself. And her story you can see on Netflix, The 3 Deaths of Maricela Escobedo. Excuse me. So this movement started really in the 1970s with Chilean arpilleras, which many of you will know about. These are 2 original arpilleras that somebody who I spoke to in Canada had purchased at an exhibition in the 1970s during the Pinochet government, when international groups were acting in solidarity with women's groups in Chile who were documenting the human rights abuses on these textile arts, on these works of textile art. Foucault and Derrida argued that the control of the archive is the manifestation of power. Responding to this, Brian de Avey has argued that the fragmentation of the archive assists in the structural breakdown of power. This paradigm, the fragmentation or dispersal of the archive, breaking the centralized control of power, was key to the success of the arpilleras created in the 1970s that you see here. And I think also relates to these new movements that Juana has been talking about, documenting the conflict in Colombia, and which we'll hear about tomorrow from Erika Silva of Memorarse in Chile, talking about human rights issues in Chile, using textile art as a way of documenting these political issues that are so important and connecting people, and creating narrative art to connect people and communicate about the human rights abuses across national borders. So from those original arpilleras, the tradition developed, and Erika will speak more about this tomorrow. She's representing one of the artillerista groups, one of the groups. She's in the art collective with Cynthia Amanya and Alejandro Campos, who lead Memorarte, a participatory needlework group. They use applique to make protest banners, which they also exhibit in institutions. And those of you who are in Murray Edwards have seen one of these banners in our exhibition downstairs. We've also shared in the chat the virtual exhibition, so those of you at home can see the arpillera displayed alongside the other works of textile art that Naomi curated. In Colombia, we've heard from Juana, representing the Tejedoras de Mampujan, about the way that textile art is used also for therapeutic processes, and the work that the tejedoras do. And in Colombia, there are also lots of different needlework groups. The Tejedoras de Mampujan is perhaps the most famous group because they won the Peace Prize in Colombia in 2015, but there's a whole network called the Red de Tejedoras por la Memoria y la Vida. Unfortunately, Isabel Gonzalez, who has an online archive of these testimonial textiles, hasn't been able to be with us in person, but she's going to present tomorrow about her archive. And these modern day testimonial textiles are used in therapeutic processes. So the one in our exhibition was a woman, it focuses on the woman giving birth, but of course the process was the Tejedoras de Mampujan went to the community and sat down with everyone in the community and allowed all of the members to talk about their experience of the conflict before they decided to create that work of textile art together as a community. So I believe that this is part of the holistic process of transitional justice. Transitional justice emerges not just from the legal processes that we all know, but from narrative truth, when people tell their histories through these works of textile art, or through storytelling, or through other forms of narratives, dialogical truth, where people discuss it. And of course, this is why we have the exhibitions, to open up discussions like we have today. And of course, by the healing and restorative truth, which happens through this process. So this is an extract from the Mujer pariendo en el árbol, women giving birth in the tree that I'm talking about. And the Tejedoras de Mampujan that Juana was representing today, they also make art about their history as Afro-descendants, about the resilience of the communities in Colombia against the different forms of injustices that they've experienced, from slavery through the conflict to the disappearance of human rights leaders that Juana mentioned today. And so I'd just like to reflect on these as constellations of memory, semiotic systems. I'd like to quote Elizabeth Jelen, saying that memories are understood as subjective processes anchored in experiences and in symbolic and material markers. And I see these works of textile art as precisely this, these symbolic and material markers that allow us to connect transversally across the globe and reflect on these different histories. Thank you very much.